All right, I think we are live. Welcome everyone to our monthly Intelligence for Admins webinar series, where we cover everything from dashboard design to integrations and to this month's topic, troubleshooting formulas, which is something we haven't done before. So it should be fun. I'm Derek, I lead our customer education efforts at TrackVia. And today we've got our troubleshooting master, Leanna, with us. If you want to introduce yourself to everyone, Leanna.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me, Derek. My name is Leanna Ramos. I'm the customer support team lead, and I love troubleshooting formulas. It's probably some of my favorite questions that come into the queue. I also figured I'd throw in a little fun fact. I've been with TrackVia for 2 years now, tomorrow. So it's a perfect timing for me to join my first webinar and doing probably one of my favorite topics. But thank you.
It's like a celebration. I feel like we should have like emojis popping up everywhere with
Yeah,
balloons. Congratulations, that's awesome. Time
thank you.
flies.
It does, it does. So I'm excited to get into formulas.
Yeah, good, good, good. Okay, so let's take a look at the agenda for today's webinar. I guess before the agenda, we always got to do housekeeping, right? So everyone's in listen only mode. We highly encourage questions though. If you have questions, please send them through the chat. Throw everything you've got at us, right? All the formula questions you want answered today, we'll see if we can answer them. Of course, if we can't answer them or we don't get to them, we'll follow up with you via email after the webinar. Okay, we are recording this. It's going to be posted on the TrackVia University website, and we'll send you an email with the recording shortly after the webinar as well. Okay, now we can look at the agenda. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to look at some of the helpful resources that we already have out there for you to use, to learn about formulas, functions, and to leverage in your troubleshooting endeavors. So that's the first thing we'll take a look at. Then we're actually going to get into formula errors and troubleshooting. Okay. The way that we think of this is that there's kind of two categories of issues that you could have when a formula isn't working properly. Okay. The first type is a syntax error. This is where you're working in your table, you're writing a formula, you hit the save button on the table, and there's an error. Your formula isn't formatted properly. There's something wrong, right? So that's the first type of error that we're going to be looking at. Then we'll shift our focus into what we think of as just the incorrect output, right? You want your formula to do something, it's not doing that, right? Maybe it's outputting something different, maybe it's outputting nothing, right? The formula actually saved, but it's not doing the right thing. So we'll take a look at how you can figure out what's going on and what you need to change. Throughout those discussions, Leanna is going to be highlighting the tactics that she uses, that the support team uses to troubleshoot formulas and fix everybody's issues, right? And then at the end, we'll kind of come back. If we haven't answered any questions by that point or haven't answered all the questions by that point, we'll revisit questions and we'll just talk about the key takeaways from the webinar. Okay? All right, so without further ado here, we are going to start with Leanna's favorite resources, the list of things that she loves to use for troubleshooting. So take it away, Leanna.
Yes, yeah. So just some background, the support team goes through a pretty rigorous formula training to make sure we know how to write and we troubleshoot. So we become experts when we're helping on the queue, but we're always using our resources because no matter how much knowledge we may have, we got to keep fresh. So these are some of my favorites. Starting here at our TrackVia Help Center. The Help Center has a lot of good information, a lot of articles and stuff about our resources in TrackVia and things that you can learn about. Specifically, what I want to focus on, though, is in our TrackVia toolkit, we have an entire section that covers formulas and functions. So this has articles about the differences between the different field types for triggered and calculated fields, our complete list of functions, so kind of like your library of the functions that you can utilize. Also goes over some additional examples for function use cases in case you were looking for something more specific. So this is definitely number one, this formulas and functions section in our Help Center. The second place I want to highlight for our resources are TrackVia University, so TVU. Derek's team does a great job at creating these on-demand training courses for us, and specifically something I actually do reference every few months or so is in our core functionality learning path, the core 7 for functions of formulas. So again, even as much as an expert I can be at looking at formulas, we still got to stay fresh. And so going back to the basics, this is a helpful course to get that. And then the last thing in TrackVia University is also our how-to videos. We have a couple of formula videos in our how-to videos section. Once I filter with calculated fields or triggered fields, these are the 2 formula videos that pop up that help with writing formulas. So how to use child functions in logic, or also commenting in formulas. So these are my top 3 favorite resources, and you'll see me reference them throughout the rest of the call.
Awesome. So I especially love the complete list of formulas. I talk about that a lot. That's in the Help Center. No matter how many years you've been writing TrackVia formulas, it's always something that, you know, I reference, everybody references. So you'll see us reference that today, or you'll see Leanna reference that today.
Yes.
Cool. So let's jump into that first type of error that you might receive when writing formulas. These are your syntax errors, the glaring red messages that you get when you hit the save button in your table builder. So we're gonna look at a bunch of examples here, and we'll just break them down for what they mean and how to fix them. So let's jump in.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm going to start running through it. So first we have our missing closure error. Just to speak out for these error messages, they'll be pretty consistent, where the first line, that's going to be consistent, saying your actual field that you're writing your formula in didn't pass validation. The second line is going to be what we need to read thoroughly, so that way we can identify, like, where's the problem. So in this example, we have a formula, and we can see in the error message that it is missing, let me go back. It is missing a parenthesis or a comma. So we have a parse error near a certain character. It shows us in the specified formula, gives the formula, and is saying it's expecting a comma or parenthesis. So sometimes with these errors, when we are trying to figure out where's our missing parenthesis, it can be a little hard to identify right away in the formula box. So a tool that we like to use on support is actually a code editor called Sublime. And so I'm going to show you an example of what that is and how we utilize it for these types of errors. So I copied the formula from the screenshot over here into Sublime. And as you can see, Sublime is helpful because it helps us identify where our open curly brackets and our closed curly brackets are, or even also our open parentheses and our closed parentheses. So here we can see that we have an open and closed curly bracket for our field name. Here for our is blank, we have an open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis for the is blank function. And so this is going to help us really resource where is our missing function or parenthesis. When we look at the formats of the functions, I have them listed down here. So something that we really like to do is work from the inside out, because if one, it helps us keep organized, but two, this is going to help us identify where's our missing piece. If we have our if statement, we have a condition first, a true result, and then a false result. So I'm going to utilize this format first when I'm looking at this function formula. If I want to look at my condition right here, I can see that's utilizing this is blank function. So let me take a look at the format of this is blank function. We have our is blank function where it's an open parentheses, the field name, and a closed parenthesis. If I look back up here, I have my is blank, open parenthesis, but the closed parenthesis is all the way out here, and this is my field name. So if I want to match the format, I must know I have to put a closed parenthesis in this is blank function. We compare our true result, referencing another field, and that's open and closed. We're referencing our false result, referencing another field, that's also open and closed. And then we can now go on to the outside of our if statement and make sure we have an open and closed parenthesis. So now that I have a big green check mark on all my open and closed parentheses, I now know this is the right format for my formula. And if I were to copy and paste this into my table, I wouldn't experience that error anymore. So this is how Sublime has been able to help us, again, highlighting those open and closed parentheses. That's how I would go about this missing closure error.
Cool. So Leanna, that code editor is called Sublime, right?
Yes.
That's the one that you like to use, the support team likes to use. There's lots of other ones. It's something that you can just download free from the web, right?
Definitely. Yeah, we use Sublime. I don't really know. I think it's just been passed down from support team member to support team member. So as long as it's any other code editor that can help identify those open and closed statements or the parentheses and curly brackets, that's going to be helpful for you.
Yeah, I could see this being helpful, even just writing formulas. If you have a really long, complex formula that you're writing, that might even be helpful. Not even to troubleshoot, right? Just to write something. So nice.
Definitely. Sometimes if you especially get those like nested if functions, or you kind of have a really long, let's say another formula for your true result or your false result, this is definitely what I like to do in Sublime. Very separated out. I now have it in lines and I can be organized. But again, it still will highlight my open parenthesis, my closed parenthesis. So I make sure that I'm still staying organized with this format.
Nice.
Yeah, cool. Let's move on to the next one. So in this error message, it's a little bit of the opposite. It's an extra closure. We can see that it's an unused input, and it shows us what it is, an extra parenthesis, after attempting to parse the formula, and it gives us the formula. If we look back at our example, again, we have a very similar formula as the one before, but there's an extra parenthesis here. So I want to give an example back into Sublime. If I were to have this formula in Sublime, I would want to paste it into this code editor, and I can identify again, where are my open and closed parentheses? So if I work from the inside out, I'm checking this is blank. I have my open parenthesis and my closed, that's all checking out. My fields are all open and closed as well. And if I go to my if statement, we have an open parenthesis and a closed. So since this is my lingering one that doesn't have a pair, I will know that this is my extra parenthesis in my formula. And again, I can copy and paste this back into the table and I won't experience that error anymore. Cool. Any questions there? I think we're good to move on.
Yep, haven't seen any questions come through so far. Remember to chat through anything and everything. We'll answer them as they come up.
Cool. Well, now we're going to go over misspelling. So we can always get misspelling errors. These are a few of the examples of the misspelling errors, and here's an example of our formula. But for this first error message, we can see that the function was not found. So that means that our function name has a misspelling. It looks like there was an extra R in this error example specifically. Another one is the comment column doesn't exist in the table. So column is always it's simultaneous to field. So whenever I see column, I'm thinking, okay, where's my field name in the formula? There's likely a misspelling in that field name. In this example, we're missing an M. The invalid relationship name order is misspelled. When we look at our relationship fields, we have our table name, our relationship name, and the field of that relationship record. And so in this case, the invalid relationship name is this middle piece, and that was misspelled. And then the last piece is our invalid table name. So again, for our relationship fields, we have table relationship field. We would look at our table name on the first part, and that would have been misspelled. So it's user error, right? An extra letter can sneak in while we're typing in our formulas and the fields that we're referencing. So something I always like to recommend when it comes to eliminating these misspelling errors is actually here. So I'm in TrackVia, I'm in a table, I'm in also a calculated field. And as you can see, when I just click into the calculated field, I now have a list of the fields I can reference. I can reference the fields on my same table. I can reference fields on my related table, or I can even pull in the functions that I want to utilize. Let's say you're in the middle of a formula. If you have an open and closed curly bracket, you can click in the middle of it, and then you'll also get this menu. But this menu is helpful because then you could just double click on the option that you would like, and you can eliminate that spelling error right there and then. Cool. Now we're going to go over a misuse of a triggered field. So in this error, we have triggered fields cannot reference other triggered fields or calculated fields that exist on the same table. In this example, we can assume that this box is in a triggered field, and with this formula, we're referencing a calculated number 1 field and a calculated number 2 field. One of these may be a trigger field or a calculated field. And right here, it's just telling us there's a restriction with this triggered field. So this is knowledge that we have to learn, or we just may not know right off right away. And so where can we figure out this information? This is where I would direct back to our formulas and functions section in our help center. And I would want to go to our triggered fields versus calculated fields article. So really referencing our help center to get some of this information we may not know immediately. As you can see in this article, it covers the differences between our triggered fields and calculated fields, and it even tells us when you can't use triggered fields, and specifically for this example, when referencing other calculated or triggered fields in the same table, this is when you can't use a triggered field. So this would be an example to probably look into our help center, see if there's just some more knowledge we need to brush up on, and that's going to tell us why we're experiencing this error. Now we have an error message about referencing child fields. So this one is child column. Column again is kind of related to a field or synonymous to a field. Cannot be used without aggregate function. So as we can see, we have our if statement. We have our relationship field, which is our child field reference in our condition. And yeah, there's no other function that's around this child field. Well, let's first look at what an aggregate function is. Because again, if we're not too sure what that is, we have those references or those resources available. If we go back to our help center, I'm going to now open our complete list of functions, and I'm going to go to our child aggregate functions. Now, child aggregate functions, if we think back about TrackVia, we have a parent table and a child table. A parent can have many children. Therefore, these are functions that are able to look at all the child records and do a calculation and provide an output for them. So that is what a child aggregate function is. These are all functions that will look down at those multiple records and provide an output. But as you can see with the formats of these functions, they always need a child field referenced. Therefore, we can't reference a child field without our child aggregate functions, and that is why we're receiving that error. Ooh. Vice versa, or the opposite, misuse of a child function. So in this error message, we are using a child aggregate function, but it is only supported on a child field. So we're getting an error message. In this example, we have our average function, and it's looking at two fields on the same table. Well, as we mentioned, we can't look at those fields on the same table. We must reference the child field. So if I were to come down and find my average function here, I see that it's a child field reference. So we must be looking at a child field specifically. Since that's not the case for our format, that is why we can't use that average function on the same table. Now we have our last error here, wrong number of function inputs. In this example, we have too few arguments to function date diff, expected 3 but got 2. So in this example, we have our date diff function, and we can see we have 1, which is our end date likely, 2, which is our start date. Well, this is an area where I would want to confirm what is the format of our date diff function. Again, we're going to go back to our formula examples, and date diff is going to be with our date functions. And as we can see here, we need the format of end date, start date, and the unit established. Well, if we come back to our example here on the screenshot, we have our end date, our start date, but the unit is not established. So that would be our third argument in this case for this function that we would need to add. And those were our syntax errors. But
Awesome.
Now we're going to go on to wrong output.
Great, and that's not all of them, right? There are others that you might run into. These are probably the most common ones that you'll see, though, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. They're again, going back, I guess, to what I said in the beginning, usually that first line will be consistent, but definitely read thoroughly on that second line because that's going to help guide you into where the problem is probably rooted and help you move forward as to how to troubleshoot that error.
Definitely.
Cool.
Also, I want to throw one thing in there that I've gotten tripped up on before. If you go back one screen here to the error message, sometimes if you're working in a table, you might be writing multiple calculated fields at a time, maybe 2 or 3 of them, right? However many you want to write at a single time. And if you have multiple errors in your formulas, right? So maybe you have 2 fields, they both have an issue. It's only going to show you 1 error at a time. So also on the first line, don't overlook the field name, right?
Yeah.
That's being pointed out to you, because I've definitely like been banging my head against the table at times, like, no, this formula is right, and it was just referencing a different field, and I was missing that part of the error message. So definitely take their time to read those.
Yes, definitely. Even though it's consistent, yeah, definitely that field name will tell you which field is wrong because I've done the same thing just this morning. So no worries there.
We did have a question that I want to get to before we move on from Tom. Thanks for joining, Tom. Always good to have you on these webinars. Let's see. Tom wants to know, Leanna, are the functions that TrackVia uses or uses in formulas standard so that Sublime or any other code editor would be able to know that they're a function when you paste it into Sublime, right?
That one I don't have an immediate answer for, simply because with Sublime, the tool that we utilize it is really just to make sure our open and closed parentheses are like established. It helps us identify those quickly, but then also as we're writing our scripts, it's an easier way to organize it. I'm not certain that Sublime would be able to recognize what an is blank function is, and also what that format is. In that case, I would probably refer to TrackVia, where when we have like our menu of functions that populate. So let me click into those and get our menu. This is where you can see, okay, my child concatenate function, I need my child field and I need my delimiter. For my is checked function, I need my checkbox option and my checkbox field. This is probably where you're going to find that format specifically, and then you can copy and paste that into Sublime and use that as your guide. But yeah, so I don't think Sublime's going to be able to recognize that for you. And I hope that's answering your question. I hope I'm on the right page there.
I think that answers the question, right? It's Sublime is not going to be your best tool for knowing if a function is available or if you're misspelling field names or function names. It's not going to know any of those things. It's mainly a tool to help you understand, do you have the logic right? Do you have the right amount of closures, you know, or nested pieces or of a function, right? So it's more of a syntax thing than the actual functions and names being used. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. I mean, this could be, I haven't ran into it recently, but I know sometimes when you're like writing a formula in this box, sometimes you might get suggestions and it can trip you up. So Sublime is definitely helpful, where it's like, okay, if I want to use this function and I want to supplement this is blank function into my condition, it kind of makes that easier to write that formula in a code editor, because it just keeps everything organized. Or again, you can double click if you have just other fields, like multiple is blanks, you can see like how many is blanks am I using. So that's more so what it is a code editor. So that way you could just make it a little bit easier to write your formulas.
Nice. Great.
Cool.
That's the only question I've seen so far. So let's move on to wrong output, right? This is the tough one, right? This is the one that is a little bit trickier to triage and figure out. It's, hey, the formula saved, but I don't know what's wrong with it. So let's see, Leanna, what the playbook is here, how you figure out what the issue is with a formula that's not working.
Yeah, definitely. So this is our troubleshooting playbook, our troubleshooting steps. We have about 5 steps here. First and foremost, whenever we get a formula question basically on the queue, and it's like, I have my formula, but my expected output is not what I'm expecting, or the output that I'm seeing is not what I was expecting. So the very first thing is we need to identify the problem. What is your expectation? What is the output that's being shown? So what is actually occurring? So that's definitely number one with our troubleshooting, is we need to be very clear as to like, what is our end goal? What is the problem? The next thing is we'll obviously review the formula. We're going to check the order of operations. We're going to check the use for functions. We're going to check the syntax. The third thing is going to be review the field type and output. So in TrackVia, we have multiple different field types. We have date fields, number fields, text fields. So we need to make sure that we're utilizing the correct field type, as well as the output. Is the output matching the type of field type I'm using? Last, or fourth, we're going to check our resources, because again, those are super helpful. Even myself, I'm checking resources all the time to just give myself a double check, or also if I just need need, especially that complete list of functions, I need to understand, okay, what other options do I have available? Checking our resources is very helpful. And then the last piece is modifying the formula. After we've probably generated some possible solutions, we need to troubleshoot that. We need to reproduce the problem, implement a solution, try it out again. And with that, we're modifying the formula and testing the various inputs so that way we make sure it works. So this is the framework that we're going to reference back to as I go through some of examples of an expected output that didn't actually meet your expectation. Your resulted output didn't meet your expectation with the formula. So let me go back into TrackVia because we're going to do these live. So for my first example, I'm going to explain what the problem is. We obviously have a start date and an end date. There's a calculated date field, and our user is wanting to see the time in between the start date and end date, but they're not getting a value in this calculated field. Their formula is not working because there's no value in here. So we've identified our problem. I now need to go check the formula. So if I go to edit my table and I'm checking this calculated date field, well, I can see that the formula is a date diff function. We have our end date, our start date, and our units. And I can see that the formula itself is written out properly. We have our date diff function, end date, start date, and the units. So that's working out fine. But now I have to take a look and see, we're reviewing our formula. Let's review now the field type and output. Right here, we have a calculated date field. Well, if we want to figure out the time in between two dates, if I'm saying, okay, it's Tuesday, and I want to figure out how many days it is until Friday, that's going to output a number, right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 3. So if we're outputting a number and our field type is a date field, then likely it's because our field type is not the proper field type for the output we are expecting. So in this case, sorry, messed up a little bit. I would probably check our resources for one, so I'll go ahead and do that in a minute. And then I'm going to either modify my formula or test out a solution. So if I check my resources and I look at this date diff function, again, with this date diff function, or I guess this complete list of functions has a really good thorough explanation for every function that's utilized and also what type of field types we should be using it in. This function can be used to determine the number of months, days, and hours, etc. And then I think it also says here, here we go. If using this function alone, you would insert the function into a calculated text or calculated number field type. So that, by checking my resources, I'm already testing a solution and I'm also confirming my solution. Now let's actually modify the formula or implement our solution into the table and test it out. So as you can see here, I basically copied my original formula, put it into a calculated number field, and now I'm going to test that solution and see if it works. This is my original view. I added a new view that has that calculated number field in, and now we can see with my start date, my end date, my calculated date was not generating a value, but my calculated number is generating a value, and it's because it was the wrong field type. We have a number, we need a number field for this formula. Calculated date field is not going to generate just a number. So that is our first example. Moving on to another example is a null value. So in this case, again, we're going to identify our problem. Right now we have a revenue field, a cost field, and a net. This is doing a basic subtraction of 80 minus 20 equals 60. Well, great. But what happens if I change my revenue to 100 and I don't have any costs? So I'm going to make that blank. Now my net doesn't have anything in it. It has blanked out and there's no value. Well, now we're going to go ahead and review our formula. If I go in, edit our table, take a look at our net field, we can see it's just a basic arithmetic of revenue minus cost. Okay, well, that's checking out to be fine for me. What's the next step? Let's review our field type and output. Well, our field type is a number field because it's calculated currency, but we can also see with these little hints, number, number, number. Well, a number field sounds right for me. It's going to be a number. Our output, we know, is not generating anything. It went blank. Okay, well, now I'm going to check our resources. Let's go ahead back to our complete list of functions, and let me see if I can find a resource that is going to fit what I need. Now, our complete list of functions can do a control F, which is really neat and handy, where you can probably type in null or blank and see what options arise. But I'm going to for the sake of time, I'm going to just direct our eyes specifically to this coalesce function. What this coalesce function is, as if I'm looking through all of our options, it basically tells us that, where is it? I think right here. You'll want to use a coalesce function whenever you wish to add two values where one may contain a null value, so you can replace it with a 0 instead. Well, that sounds exactly what I need, right? I need to subtract one field from the other, and this cost is a null value. So if we have 100 minus x, and we're supposed to output a number with that, we need to identify what x is. X, it has to be a whole number. So what we're going to use is coalesce. I went to my resources, I found the coalesce function, so I'm going to rewrite my formula so that way it uses that coalesce function, and I'm going to also test out this solution. As you can see, we have our format, we have our coalesce function where we need the field name and then the null value replacement. I have my coalesce function, it's looking at the revenue field. If this revenue field is null, make it a 0. And then subtract it by my coalesce of my cost field. If my cost field is null, make it a 0 as well. Once I save and close this new formula, and I take a look at our table now, we can see that now we get our value of 100 in our calculated currency, even when this value is null. If we go back to our original and just make sure that it's working even for our previous case, we can see that it does work for any and all cases, whether this is null or it has a value, it will still calculate the appropriate net. That is how I would troubleshoot this null value. Let me go on to my next one. We have another example here about backward logic. So again, we're referencing our playbook. We have our problem, review the formula, review the field type and output, check resources, and modify formula. So I'm going to go a little quicker here. We have our backward logic. Our logic, basically from what, let's say the problem that I got presented to on the queue was, hey, if my quantity is less than or equal to 10, I want my size to be small. If my quantity is less than or equal to 50, I want my size to be medium. Otherwise, anything else, large. Well, as we can see, this size field is not matching the logic that I'm probably putting in my formula because I have a quantity of 10, but my size is medium. So let's check out this formula. If I look at my size field, or my size, my size field, I have my quantity is less than or equal to 50, then show medium. So I have my condition and then my true result. Then I have my false result. It's another if statement. If my quantity is less than or equal to 10, I have my new true result of small. Otherwise, my very last false result is large. Well, with the format of the formula, that's checking out. With the syntax of the formula, that's checking out. Well, let's now look at our field type and our output. Our field type is looking accurate. It is just a calculated text, and our output that we want to see is a text, medium, small, large. We are getting an output, so the output is working. Let's now look back to our resources as this runs through. So if I were to go back to our complete list of functions, and I were to look at our if statement, we have, again, more information about if statements, but specifically I want to talk about how the if functions read left to right. And if you have a nested if function where the false result is your second condition, you will want to make sure your conditions go in order from left to right. I think also up here it talks about how it will assess the first condition. If the condition is met, then it will directly go to the true result, and it does not meet the false result. So if we compare that back to our formula, we can see that a quantity of 9, or I think it was a quantity of 10 was the original. Well, that's less than or equal to 50. So it is meeting our condition here, and it is moving to our true result. That means it is never going to touch our false result, which our second assessment is. This quantity is less than or equal to 10. So what are we going to do now? We're going to modify the formula. Since this is a backward logic, we kind of need to move this quantity is less than or equal to 10 first, then assess whether it's less than or equal to 50 second. We want to make our first if condition the small one. So as you can see here, I'm going to have my if condition. I'm going to find my quantity field. and we're going to make that less than or equal to 10. If it is, I'm going to have small as my true result. Otherwise, I'm going to add my new if condition. I'm going to now have my assessment of quantity is less than or equal to 50. That's my second condition. My true result is going to be medium. Otherwise, my very last false result is going to be large. And there we go. So this is how I would rewrite and modify my formula. So that way, now I can see if this logic is working properly. Let me go ahead and save and close this table. And now I can see when my quantity is 10, it shows small. Let me test it out when my quantity is 30, because I know that's greater than 10, but less than 50. Oh, maybe I got to refresh. Maybe I messed something up. So we're going to do a quick live troubleshooting here.
Love it. Live troubleshooting. This is good.
Yeah, right. There we go. So quantity greater than or equal to 50, we need to change that to a less than or equal to 50, right? So quantity greater than or equal to 10, less than or equal to 10. This is a little bit of a speeding up of the process, but now I've modified my formula. Let's check this out again. We have 10, size is small. We have 30, size is medium, and we have 60, size is large. If we go back to 10, it's working for small as well. So that is our backward logic. We need to make sure we are reading from left to right when we are writing our formulas, especially with those if statements. If you meet the condition the first time, gonna automatically go to the true result and then not meet the false result. So that was this example here. We have a fourth example about triggered versus calculated fields. So here, again, identifying our problem, we have a due date of 11:45, cool, of today, and we have a calculated field or a triggered field that is counting the time remaining in seconds. Okay, well, what's the problem here? Let's say that I got a question in the queue saying, anytime I refresh this seconds number is not accurate because it's supposed to be less than 6,212 because I'm only 8 minutes away from my time, my due date, and it's not saying that. Well, let's take a look at the formula. As we can see, our time remaining in seconds is in a triggered field. Well, let's go through our steps. We have our review formula. We have our date diff function, we have an end date, a start date, and the units. Our date diff function, our end date is the due date because that's what we're leading up to. Our start date is now, meaning to this timestamp, and our units are in seconds. Well, that's looking all right to me. Let's take a look at our next step, review the field type and output. Our field type is a number field. Our output is a number. We confirm that as well. So that's working fine. Check our resources. Well, let's take a look. We have a now function in our triggered field. If we come back to our resources up here to our triggered versus calculated fields, we can again see when you can't use triggered fields using the now or today function. Well, why? Let me save the formula. Let's take a look up here. For calculated fields, each time a view or table is loaded, all the calculations run. Triggered fields allow you to run your calculations when you save a record, which allows you to tailor your applications and so on and so forth. But basically, with this article, we've been able to identify triggered fields will only run when a save event occurs or when you are creating a record, saving a record, changing a record, whatever that may be. Calculated fields run whenever you are loading up a view. So in that case, if we come back to our formula and we see that this is in a triggered field, we want to probably move this to a calculated field. So again, now I'm going to go ahead and modify my formula. I'm going to take this formula and just modify it into a different field type, a calculated number field. I'm going to save and close. And now when I take a look at that new view, I can now see that my due date and my time remaining, because I didn't change this record, that's still showing 6,000 seconds, whereas now my calculated field is showing the reduced seconds of 342. And so that is how we would troubleshoot this output. Again, referencing our resources are very helpful, especially when we talk about the field types that we're utilizing. When we come back here, we have another example about function order. So as we can see here, we have a start date, an end date, and then a calculated number. Well, what's our problem? This calculated number is a negative number. If I have a start date and an end date, and again, I want to find the difference between these two dates, how is it going to be a negative number? Well, now we have to review our formula. If we come to our formula, we can see that they have a date diff function. Again, it's an end date, a start date, and the units. Well, we have our date diff function, but we have our start date, our end date, and the number of units. Well, if I look back at the formula, I would assume that I need my end date first and then my start date second, but we have our units. So likely that is our problem. If we compare our field type with the output, well, our output, we're seeing a negative number, but the field type is still showing a number. I'm going to skip this part, but again, if we were to reference our resources, really we would want to look at the format of the date diff function. But now we're going to go ahead and modify the formula. So here, I'm just going to take out this comment. We're going to comment that back out, but I modified the formula where I'm moving the end date to be my end date, matching with the format of the date diff function, my start date to be my start date, matching with the format of the date diff function, and then keeping my units as days. If I test this new change out by flip-flopping those two, I can now see I have a positive number for my date diff function. Now
I just want to throw out there before we get to the last example, I've seen several times, Leanna, you are showing formulas and there are comments in your formulas. Yes. Just want to point out to everybody on the webinar that that is possible to add comments into your formulas. A lot of people don't realize that. It can be really helpful to, especially with lengthy formulas, or you want to, it's maybe not super clear what the formula is doing. Adding a comment into the formula is helpful for yourself, for other administrators that look at it. It's definitely something to leverage.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a how-to video here, like I mentioned earlier, in our how-to videos. If you filter by calculated or triggered fields, you'll see that there. Two, I also, just again, from the support side of things, we see, where am I? Getting all mixed up real quick. If I come back to this table, documentation is always helpful. So especially for admins, or if you have multiple admins in an account and you want to make a note like, why am I doing this formula? Or what is this complex formula doing? Adding a comma to have that note is always helpful. The other part too is like, yeah, if you want to deactivate the original formula and do a little bit of a modifying in this box, you can do that with the comments as well. It allows for you to still reference this formula and the syntax of it, but it's not actually active. So then that way you can just focus on what is active and what you're writing. But yes, commenting, very helpful. As you can see, I'm using it heavily today.
Good point. Sorry to interrupt you. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, it's good. Cool. We have our last example here. So if we're identifying our problem, we have a date of training, and then we have a field that is calculating 2 months after the date of training. As we can see right now, everything is working fine. But once I move my date of training to the month of November, this field blanks out. Why is that? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our formula. So if we go to our date of training formula, we can see that they're kind of doing a concatenation here, right? It's a calculated date field. And they're taking the year of the date of training, they're pasting it, they're adding a dash, they're taking the month of the date of training, and they're adding 2, they're adding a dash with that concatenate, and then they're taking the day of the date of training. So if we review our field type and our output, it's a calculated date field, great. Our output is outputting a date when we have in August, so those are all good. But if we go to our referencing for resources, first I need to figure out what am I going to reference in the resource. This all looks fine to me, it's just not working for November. So in this case, I would actually break out the formula, right? We have multiple concatenations in this formula. It's like just multiple functions in this one formula. And so one, I want to change the field type. I want to take it from a date field and I want to put it to a text field. And I just want to see what that output is in a text field. Second, I want to take the year, separate it out, the month, separate it out with the +2, and the day, and separate it out as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and save and close my table. And let's take a look and see what those outputs are. So as I can see, I have my date of training, but my output date for that 2 months later is outputting a 13, 22, 2023. The year of 2023, the month of 13, and the day of 22. Well, for my day of training 2 months later, I should be in the year of 24. My month should be 1 because there's no 13th month, and my day is still 22. So this is where I would probably reference my resources. If I know in my month field, we wanted to add 2 months, well, let's see if there's a better solution than just taking the month, right, and adding 2. So take the month of the day of training and adding 2. Let's see if there's a better solution there. If I go back to my resources in the Help Center, my complete list of functions, I can go to my date functions, and now I can pretty much scroll through and find a solution. So here I have an example of a date add function. What this date add function will do is I have my date field, I have the number of the units to add or subtract, and then I can label my units, units. So if I wanted to follow this format for date add, I can do date of training, 2 as my number of units to add, and my unit being month. If I come back to my table and I now modify the formula, so that way I'm doing a date add, date of training, 2 and month, great, I want to test this out. But also with this resource, what field type do I need this in? I want to make sure I'm making sure the field type is correct. You can use a date add and date sub functions in a calculated date field to add or subtract days. So at least I know it's in a calculated date field. That tells me that having it in a calculated date field is still okay. So I'm now going to save this new formula. I'm going to go down and look at my final output. And as we can see, we have our date of training in November. There's no output for our original formula in that first date field, but we now have a correct output for this new formula that's utilizing the date add function. And so just as a quick recap, we have gone through for all of these examples, these 5 troubleshooting steps of how we go about troubleshooting these unexpected outputs from our formulas that didn't present an error when we saved it, but this is how we're going through and finding that solution.
Awesome. I really appreciate the last one too, because I know that especially with really large and complex formulas, you're probably doing a lot of things, you're probably using a lot of functions, and breaking it down into pieces can really help you like isolate, right, what part of it is causing an issue. So yeah, this one really resonated with me. I like that.
Definitely, yeah. The easiest way to figure out, well, what is this outputting? Put it in a different field and check and see, because this is going to tell you what is it exactly outputting for you. But yeah, so our key takeaways for today, just with our formula troubleshooting, is use a code editor like Sublime to help understand complex and lengthy formulas. Like we showed earlier, it just helps you keep organized. It can tell you when your open and closed parentheses are. It won't tell you the exact formats, but it is a helpful tool when you're writing formulas, and especially complex and lengthy ones. Break the complex formulas down into individual parts and fields to isolate issues. As we saw in that last example, that was exactly it. I had to find my root cause. Where's my root problem? Well, that month is 13, and that's not being recognized as a date. If we were able to do that by breaking it apart into multiple fields. Understand differences in field types and desired behavior and output of your formulas. There are multiple times we were looking at the field type, and we were also comparing what is our output. Is it a date? Is it a number? Is it a text? We need to make sure our field types are in line with that. And then the last piece is consider the order of operations with formulas to execute left to right. So again, even with those if statements or just any formula, they're going to read left to right. So we need to make sure our order is correct. For the if statements, reading for that condition, making sure it's met first, whichever one we want to be first, or even that date diff function when it's looking at the end date first and the start date, we need to make sure we're putting the end date and the start date. And so those are our key takeaways. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leanna. We do have a couple questions coming through. We've got one from Vanessa that she's asking, can you convert a field's field type?
Yeah, so you can convert a field type. I'm actually probably going to refer back to our how-to videos for that, and maybe Derek, you can speak a little bit more onto it. But there is a how-to video. As far as I'm aware, for converting field types, the way that you would do it is add a new field. type. So you have to add a new field. We do have an existing feature request because that has been requested about converting field types. So maybe down the road we can see it a little bit more efficiently. But if you wanted a deep dive on that, we have a how-to video. If you filter by tables, converting a field to a different field type is right here for you.
Yep, awesome. So unfortunately, no easy button at the moment. Convert to number or something like that. But yeah, this resource should walk you through the process.
Definitely.
We've got another question from Tom. Might have missed this, came a bit late. Let's see. Did we cover parse errors? We did, yes. Actually, Tom, that was like the first thing, so that makes sense. So we'll send you the recording, of course.
Yeah.
You can go back and watch that part of it about parse errors, missing closures, too many closures.
Yeah, definitely just a quick recap for parse errors. Sublime's probably, or a code editor is probably going to be your favorite tool for those because it's going to make it a lot easier to figure out.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Got another one here from Dan. Saw that triggered fields can't use the old function. Saw that triggered fields can't use the old function. What is the old function? So yeah, I think on one of the articles that you pulled up, there was something about old.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a great question. So the old function is actually a pretty useful function, but triggered fields are actually the only ones that can use the old function. Calculated fields cannot. We do have a couple articles in the Help Center that go over it. The old function is basically a similar version of previous values, if we have any AppScript people around, but in formulas. So we have an example here about the old function, what is required of it, some examples of how to utilize it. We also have another article, which is pretty neat, that using the old function to log history of multiple fields. So yeah, the old function is a useful tool looking primarily at previous values. The biggest takeaway with that, though, is that it can only be utilized in triggered fields, not calculated fields, because triggered field values are saved in the database, whereas calculated fields are not. That's why we can just refresh a page and have a calculation pop up for us, whereas triggered fields, they need to be saved. So yeah, old function resources are in the formulas of function section of our TrackVia Help Center.
Cool. So actually the opposite, Dan, right? Triggered fields can use the old function. And then
Correct.
also, I'll throw this part in there too. Last summer, I think we did a webinar just on the old function. So different ways that you can use it. So go check out our webinar library for that webinar as well.
Definitely. I can show also where that is real quick while you're talking. I think our webinar library is right here. So if you go to our TVU, webinars and demos, right there.
Awesome.
Great.
I think those are all the questions so far. So we'll kind of hang on here a second just to give everybody a chance to get all their questions in. If you were looking for something and you didn't hear it, we'll give you a minute. And as you're typing out all your questions, we'll kind of wrap things up. So just the resources, right? Leanna covered them pretty in depth here today, but the Help Center articles, there's some TVU videos, courses that are useful for you. Definitely get to know those. Support is always here to help. If you can't figure it out yourself, definitely just call up Leanna. She'll help you figure it out, right?
So we also have a great team, just so I echo out to, again, our team, we have gone through a lot of training to make sure we are knowledgeable and able to help as much as we can. We're actively going through some pretty rigorous AppScript training to make sure we're suitable with those as well. So yeah, our team is eager to help you. So any questions that may come up, let us know.
Be careful what you wish for there with all your AppScript troubleshooting.
No, it's great.
And then, of course, you know, we always talk about the professional services team. They're excellent as well for more complex needs that you might have, app modifications, bigger ones, app builds, even smaller things. We're there to help you that if you need us to kind of take on that work as well. Our next webinar is going to be at the end of September. The topic TBD, but make sure you put that on your calendar. It's always I think it's the last Tuesday of the month. and it's at the same time. So just, you know, put the recurring calendar invite on there so nobody schedules anything. And then we'll send you the recording. When you log off, you'll also be presented with a couple of questions. If you have 2 minutes, we'd love for you to answer those questions. Just help us make these webinars better in the future. I don't see any other questions that have come in. So last chance here for questions. Okay. Thank you so much, Leanna, for joining us and for explaining all things error related and output issue related and the steps that you take for troubleshooting those. So hopefully that was helpful to the attendees today, and let us know if you have any questions after the fact. All right.
Thank you for having me, Derek, and thank you all for joining. Yeah, hopefully it was helpful and excited to see you guys come into the queue if you have any questions. Here to help.
All right. See you next month, everyone.
Bye.